The Zephyrian Syndicate had turned warfare into an art form, and like most art forms it was equal parts pretentious and profitable. Their latest masterpiece wasn't a sculpture or a symphony, but a creature designed to make humans extinct. With the kind of efficiency that would make their shareholders weep tears of joy, the corporate boardrooms of Nexus Station hummed with the quiet satisfaction of beings who had solved an equation that had been troubling the galaxy for decades. Humans, as it turned out, were surprisingly difficult to exterminate through conventional means, not because they were particularly strong or fast, though they were annoyingly persistent, but because they had this maddening habit of adapting to everything the universe threw at them. Biological weapons. They developed immunities. Psychological warfare, they turned it into entertainment. Energy weapons, they somehow figured out how to make them more efficient and then sold improved versions back to their enemies at competitive prices. The Syndicate had spent the better part of a century trying to crack the human problem, pouring credits into research projects that promised quick solutions and delivered expensive failures. They'd tried engineered plagues that humans turned into vaccines, robotic assassins that humans reprogrammed into household appliances, and mimetic viruses that humans somehow transformed into comedy shows that became wildly popular across 17 star systems, which was why Executive Thane Vexgorian was particularly proud of Project Nightshade. Finally, after years of disappointment and declining profit margins, they had created something that couldn't be repurposed, negotiated with, or turned into a sitcom. The Nightshade was pure predator, engineered at the genetic level to be the perfect human hunting machine. The creature had been growing in the bioforges of Research Lab 7 for 18 months, its development carefully monitored by the Syndicate's best geneticists. Dr. Maltheso, the project's lead scientist, had approached the design with the methodical precision of someone who understood that evolution was just sloppy engineering waiting to be improved. The Nightshade stood 7 feet tall and moved like liquid shadow made solid. Its hide was a deep matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its eyes glowed with a soft bioluminescence that spoke of enhanced night vision. Every muscle had been optimized for the hunt, every sense tuned to detect human prey from miles away. Its claws could slice through military-grade armor, its teeth could crush bone like breadsticks, and its nervous system processed information at speeds that made most computers look sluggish. But the real breakthrough wasn't in its physical capabilities, impressive as they were, but in its psychological conditioning. The Nightshade had been programmed at the neurological level to view humans as the ultimate prey, not just food, but a challenge to be conquered, a puzzle to be solved, a target that existed solely to validate its purpose. It dreamed of hunting humans, fantasized about the chase, and felt a deep, abiding satisfaction every time it successfully completed a kill. The initial field tests had been spectacular. The Nightshade had been deployed against 3 separate human research outposts, and the results had exceeded all projections. The creature hunted with a patience that was almost artistic, stalking its prey for days before moving in for the kill. It learned from each encounter, adapting its tactics to overcome human defenses with the kind of creative problem-solving that would have impressed human engineers if they'd lived long enough to appreciate it. Director Quindar, who ran the Nexus Station facility, had watched the recorded footage with the expression of someone who just discovered that money could, in fact, buy happiness. The creature was everything they'd promised their investors it would be: efficient, adaptable, and utterly without mercy. It was, in every sense of the word, perfect, which was why the current situation was so deeply troubling. Dr. Vera Blackwood had been a guest of the Syndicate for the past 6 months, ever since her research vessel had been captured during what the humans called an anthropological survey mission, and the Zephyrians more accurately described as industrial espionage with academic credentials. She was a xenopsychologist by training, specializing in the behavioral patterns of apex predators across different ecosystems. Her work had taken her to dozens of worlds, studying everything from the pack dynamics of Altarian wolf analogs to the hunting strategies of vegan crystal spiders. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career studying predators, and now she was about to become prey for what was arguably the most sophisticated predator ever created. There was a certain poetic justice to it, though she would have preferred to appreciate the poetry from a safe distance. Her cell in the maximum security wing was comfortable enough by prison standards. The Syndicate wasn't needlessly cruel, cruelty was inefficient, and inefficiency was the closest thing they had to a mortal sin. She had access to books, writing materials, and even a small terminal that allowed her to access the facility's educational databases. It was, she supposed, rather like being a lab rat with a liberal arts education. The view from her window overlooked the facility's main research complex, where she could observe the daily routines of the scientists and technicians who worked there. Over the months, she'd developed a fairly comprehensive understanding of the facility's operations, largely because nobody had bothered to explain to the staff that the human prisoner might be watching them. It was a classic case of assuming that alien intelligence was somehow fundamentally different from their own. She'd been particularly interested in the arrival of the Nightshade 3 weeks ago. The creature had been transported in a specialized containment unit that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd read too many technical manuals and had unlimited funding. The security protocols surrounding its arrival had been impressive. Multiple escort ships, armed guards, and enough paperwork to deforest a small planet. From her behavioral observations, she'd deduced that the creature was some kind of engineered predator, probably designed for military applications. The excitement among the research staff was palpable, and she'd overheard enough conversations to understand that they were preparing for some kind of field test. It didn't take a xenopsychologist to figure out what role she was expected to play in that test. The demonstration was scheduled for Tuesday, because apparently the syndicate shared the universal belief that Tuesdays were when bad things happened. The facility's main amphitheater had been converted into an observation deck, with comfortable seating for the various corporate executives and military observers who'd come to witness the Nightshade's capabilities. Executive Vex Caron stood at the center of the observation deck, addressing the assembled crowd with the kind of confidence that came from having invested heavily in a sure thing. The Nightshade, he explained, represented the culmination of decades of research into biological warfare. It was faster than any human, stronger than any human, and more intelligent than most humans. It had been designed specifically to hunt their species, with every instinct and reflex optimized for that singular purpose. The beauty of the Nightshade, he continued, his voice carrying easily through the amphitheater's acoustics, is that it cannot be reasoned with, bribed, or converted. It exists for one purpose only, to eliminate human threats to syndicate interests. It is, in every sense of the word, incorruptible. The crowd murmured appreciatively. These were beings who understood the value of a good investment, and the Nightshade promised returns that would make their quarterly reports look like love letters to their shareholders. Dr. Malthesa took the podium next, launching into a technical presentation that covered the creature's specifications in exhaustive detail. Its enhanced musculature could generate force levels equivalent to industrial machinery. Its sensory organs could detect human pheromones at concentrations measured in parts per trillion. Its neural pathways had been optimized for tactical thinking, allowing it to adapt its hunting strategies in real time based on prey behavior. The psychological conditioning, she explained, is perhaps our greatest achievement. The Nightshade doesn't simply kill humans, it enjoys killing humans. The act of hunting human prey triggers reward pathways in its brain that create a genuine addiction to the chase. It will never tire of the hunt, never become complacent, and never show mercy. The audience was riveted. This was exactly the kind of innovation that made warfare profitable. A weapon that enjoyed its work was a weapon that would never need motivation or maintenance contracts. The presentation concluded with a live demonstration, using volunteers from the facility's security staff. The Nightshade was released into a controlled environment with 3 armed guards, and the results were as spectacular as they were brief. The creature moved with fluid grace, disabling the guards with surgical precision, while the audience took notes about tactical applications and deployment strategies. And now, announced Director Quindar, for the primary demonstration, the Nightshade will engage its intended target, a human subject under controlled conditions. The amphitheater's viewing screens switched to the testing chamber, where Dr. Vera Blackwood waited with the kind of calm that came from having faced death before and found it less impressive than advertised. She stood in the center of the chamber, hands at her sides, breathing slowly and evenly. The Nightshade entered the chamber like a shadow given form. Its movements were perfectly silent, its approach calculated to maximize psychological impact. It circled the human slowly, taking her measure, analyzing her behavior patterns, preparing for the kill that would validate months of careful engineering, and then it stopped. The creature's head tilted slightly, as if it were listening to something only it could hear, its glowing eyes fixed on the human with an expression that was difficult to read but definitely wasn't hunger. For a long moment, predator and prey regarded each other in perfect silence. "What's it doing?" whispered someone in the audience. "Analyzing the target," replied Dr. Malthesa, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "It's determining the optimal attack vector." But the Nightshade wasn't analyzing attack vectors. It was experiencing something that its creators had never anticipated and couldn't have programmed: curiosity. The human's scent was wrong somehow. Not wrong in the sense of being diseased or altered, but wrong in the sense of being familiar. She smelled like someone who belonged with dangerous creatures, someone who understood the language of predators. Dr. Blackwood slowly extended her hand, palm up, in the universal gesture of peaceful contact. The Nightshade's muscles tensed, ready to strike, but something in the human's posture triggered a response that had nothing to do with hunting and everything to do with recognition. The creature approached cautiously, its massive head moving closer to the offered hand. When it was close enough to touch, it paused, nostrils flaring as it took in the human scent more carefully. She smelled of other predators, of countless encounters with dangerous creatures, of someone who had spent years learning to communicate with apex hunters across the galaxy. "Kill her," muttered Executive Vexcorian, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Why isn't it killing her?" "There may be a delay in the conditioning protocols," suggested Dr. Malthesa, but her instruments were telling a different story. The Nightshade's brain activity was unlike anything they'd recorded before. Instead of the focused aggression they'd programmed, it was showing patterns associated with social bonding and pack recognition. The creature's massive head moved closer to the human's outstretched hand, and for a moment the two were connected by the kind of understanding that transcended species barriers. The Nightshade made a sound that was definitely not threatening, a low rumble that spoke of contentment rather than aggression. "This is highly irregular," announced Director Quindar, though his tone suggested that irregular was a diplomatic way of saying catastrophically expensive. The situation deteriorated rapidly from there. The Nightshade showed no inclination to complete its assigned task. Instead, it seemed to have appointed itself as the human's protector, positioning itself between her and the chamber's observation windows with body language that was unmistakably defensive. "Perhaps we should introduce additional stimuli," suggested Dr. Malthesa. "Activate the pain compliance systems." The chamber's built-in torture devices activated with mechanical precision, sending electric shocks through the floor and walls. The Nightshade's response was immediate and educational. It moved with the same fluid grace it had shown in combat, but now that grace was directed at the chamber's control systems. Within seconds, the torture devices were reduced to sparking wreckage. "It's protecting her," observed one of the military observers, his voice heavy with the kind of realization that came with watching expensive investments turn into expensive failures. "That's impossible," protested Vexcorian. "The conditioning protocols specifically prevent attachment behaviors. The creature is incapable of forming bonds with humans." "Then perhaps," said Dr. Blackwood, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system, "your conditioning protocols aren't as sophisticated as you thought." The human had somehow activated the chamber's intercom system, and her words reached the observation deck with uncomfortable clarity. She was still standing calmly in the center of the chamber, apparently oblivious to the chaos that was unfolding around her. "You created something magnificent," she continued, addressing the assembled executives and scientists, "but you made the fundamental error of assuming that intelligence and loyalty were weaknesses to be eliminated, rather than strengths to be cultivated. Your creature doesn't need programming to be effective. It needs understanding." The Nightshade moved to her side, its massive form radiating the kind of protective energy that spoke of genuine affection. When she placed her hand on its shoulder, the creature leaned into the touch with obvious pleasure. "The problem with engineering perfect weapons," Dr. Blackwood observed, "is that perfection has a way of developing its own agenda. You wanted to create a mindless killing machine, but mindless killing machines are fundamentally inefficient. What you actually created was an intelligent predator, capable of making its own choices about who deserves to die." The facility's security protocols began activating as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. Automated defense systems came online, containment barriers deployed, and alarm klaxons filled the air with the kind of noise that suggested expensive insurance claims were about to be filed. The Nightshade's response to the facility's defensive measures was both swift and comprehensive. It moved through the chamber's security systems like a tornado through a trailer park, reducing sophisticated equipment to expensive scrap metal, but there was something almost artistic about its destruction, as if it were making a point about the futility of trying to contain something that had chosen to be free. "This is a disaster," muttered Director Quindar, watching his facility's security systems disintegrate on the monitoring screens. "We've lost containment, the investors are recording everything, and our product is actively working against us." "Perhaps we should consider negotiation," suggested Dr. Malthesa, though her tone suggested that negotiation was only slightly preferable to ritual suicide. "Negotiation?" spluttered Vexcorian. "With a human and a malfunctioning bioweapon, we're supposed to be the apex predators here, are we?" asked Dr. Blackwood, her voice carrying a note of amusement that was deeply unsettling under the circumstances. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your apex predator has made some choices about who the real threats are in this situation." The Nightshade had indeed made choices. It had chosen to protect rather than kill, to bond rather than hunt, and to demonstrate that loyalty was something that had to be earned rather than programmed. It had also chosen to systematically dismantle every security system in the facility, turning the testing chamber into a fortress that no amount of corporate engineering could breach. The evacuation began 20 minutes later, when it became clear that the facility's automated systems were losing their war against a creature that had been designed to be smarter than its creators. The Nightshade and its chosen human had transformed the testing chamber into their territory, and they were defending it with the kind of efficiency that would have impressed the Syndicate's military advisors if they hadn't been too busy filing damage reports. The escape itself was almost anticlimactic. The Nightshade simply walked out of the facility, carrying Dr. Blackwood on its back like a queen being transported by her loyal mount. The security forces that remained were smart enough to maintain a respectful distance, partly because their weapons were largely ineffective against the creature's engineered hide, and partly because the creature's new behavioral patterns included a distinctly protective streak that made threatening its human inadvisable. The shuttle bay was deserted by the time they reached it, the facility staff having concluded that discretion was the better part of not becoming a casualty report. The Nightshade selected a suitable transport vessel, with the kind of casual confidence that suggested it had been studying the facility's layout for weeks, and within minutes they were clearing the station's docking bay. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The Zephyrian Syndicate quietly discontinued Project Nightshade and erased all records of its existence. The facility's survivors were debriefed, sworn to secrecy, and transferred to less sensitive positions in the corporate hierarchy. The investors were compensated for their losses and politely discouraged from asking too many questions about the specifics of the project's failure. Executive Vexcorian found himself reassigned to a position in the Syndicate's accounting department, where his talents for creative problem-solving were deemed more appropriate for managing tax returns than biological weapons. Dr. Malthesa accepted a generous severance package and retired to a quiet research position studying non-weaponized organisms on a peaceful agricultural world. Dr. Vera Blackwood and the Nightshade, meanwhile, had vanished into the Outer Rim territories, where reports began filtering back about a mysterious pair who tracked pirates through asteroid fields and hunted slavers across star systems. The locals had begun calling them the Shadow Riders, and the stories they told would have been unbelievable if they hadn't been so thoroughly documented by the criminals who survived their encounters. The galactic community, for its part, quietly updated its protocols for biological weapons development. The new guidelines specifically prohibited the creation of organisms intelligent enough to question their programming, though they diplomatically declined to explain why such restrictions were necessary. The Zephyrian Syndicate, in its official reports, classified the Nightshade project as a developmental anomaly and moved on to investigating less ambitious forms of warfare. They'd learned, in the most expensive way possible, that the universe had a sense of humor about beings who tried to engineer perfect solutions to imperfect problems. As for the Nightshade itself, it had found something that its creators had never intended to give it, a partner who understood that the best weapons were the ones that chose their own targets. The creature had been designed to hunt humans, but it had discovered that some humans were worth protecting instead of killing. The Syndicate had set out to create the perfect predator, something that would solve the human problem once and for all. Instead, they'd created perfect proof that the human problem wasn't something to be solved, it was something to be understood. And understanding, as it turned out, was the one thing that couldn't be programmed, purchased, or engineered. Some lessons, the universe seemed to suggest, were worth learning the hard way, even if the tuition was measured in quarterly profit losses and executive resignations.